like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next special meeting of the Board of Education is on Tuesday, January 20th at 7 p.m. For the chair report tonight, I'll start by saying good evening and thank you for being here tonight. Tonight, the Board of Education will begin the process of reviewing the details of the specific responsibility center budgets as part of the fiscal 27 budget process. Thank you to Dr. Byrne and our administration for your work developing the fiscal 27 budget, which we look forward to reviewing in detail tonight and over the next few weeks. The board and administration share a common goal of delivering a fiscally responsible fiscal 27 budget aligned with and supporting our district's strategic priorities and educational programming goals. It is important to note that the Board of Education is the only town body that holds the fiscal authority to allocate and approve Darien Public Schools operational funding on a line item basis, and the board takes this responsibility seriously. Over the next few weeks, the board will review and evaluate each responsibility center's budget in detail, keeping in mind our district's strategic goals and educational programming priorities. We will begin tonight's budget focus and presentations by covering our schools and curriculum and instruction proposed budgets. On January 20, we will cover special education and athletics. And on January 27, we will cover operations and the capital budget. During each of these budget meetings that will take place over the next few weeks, our administration will give detailed budget presentations covering their specific areas. These presentations will be followed by board questions and discussion. There will be opportunity for public comment after the budget portion of the meeting has concluded. Before we begin the detailed process of reviewing and evaluating the proposed 27 budget and all of the respective RCs, I would like to take a moment to put the Darien Public Schools budget into context in terms of the overall the financial cost structure and key budget drivers, particularly as we begin tonight to discuss our individual school budgets and curriculum and instruction. It is important to highlight that roughly 80% of the district's budget is comprised of personnel and related benefits costs. We are a people business with roughly 800 employees, the majority of which are our teachers, who are on the front lines each day providing instruction for our students and laying the foundation for their educational success as our students progress from kindergarten through to graduation day at Darien High School. The large majority of our personnel costs are driven by multi-year negotiated contracts. For example, we successfully concluded our new DEA teachers contract this fall. The strategic focus of the negotiations was on the recruitment and retention of teachers, professional learning, improving attendance, and creating a more fiscally responsible salary schedule that provides the district with more budget predictability from year to year. The board anticipates that this new contract will help achieve our educational priorities of attracting and retaining our teachers in a time of national teacher shortages, as well as provide new professional learning opportunities for our teachers, all of which will ultimately benefit our students. The board is committed to providing the best possible education for our students and shares the community's desire to prioritize student needs and programming in alignment with our strategic goals. We look forward to hearing more tonight from Dr. Fedigan about our educational goals and budget priorities for our schools, curriculum, and instruction, which together, along with our teachers, are the cornerstone of Darien Public Schools and the foundation upon which Darien has built its reputation for excellence in education. Thank you to Dr. Byrne, the administration, and to all of our Darien Public Schools employees for your commitment and dedication to our students. Thank you also to our parents, community, Board of Finance, and RTM for your ongoing support of Darien Public Schools. Thank you. We'll now move on to the superintendent's report with Dr. Byrne. Or did I miss something? Oh, no, we do have public. Sorry, we are moving on to public comment. We can.
Good evening. If anyone would like to participate in public comment, please approach the podium and wait to be recognized. Once recognized, please state your name and town of residence and note that you have up to 3 minutes to comment. We have no public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Byrne.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the January 13th Board of Education meeting. This morning, Ms. Loveland and I attended a CABE legislative breakfast that was held at Staples High School. It was a gathering of Board of Education members, superintendents, and legislators focused on the upcoming legislative session. Key topics discussed were rising costs associated with health insurance and transportation, along with addressing the needs of families, communities, and school districts for students with special education programming needs. Additionally, frustration was expressed about the regular additions of unfunded mandates that are placed upon schools throughout the legislative process. Congratulations to the Middlesex Quiz Bowl students for medaling at the Southern Connecticut's Regional Science, History, and Geography Bee last weekend. There were 27 possible gold, silver, and bronze medals, and Middlesex won 25 of them. Sixth grade winners are Avi Singh, Ivy Hart, Daniel Samos. Seventh grade winners are Rishi Bordia, Divya Patel, Spencer Swafford, Charlotte Nicholas, Anika Aditya, James Wasnick. The eighth grade winners are Lucian Purcell, Adam Kornstein, Grayson Holland, Eason Brooks, and Daniel Harkey. These students also qualified for the national competition in Orlando at the end of May. Good luck at their upcoming competitions in New Jersey and Washington, D.C. And in partnership with the Darien Public Library, my first Burns Book Club discussion is tomorrow evening, January 14th at 7 p.m. at the library. We'll be discussing Jennifer Wallace's book, Never Enough, When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. While I've not yet selected the next book, I anticipate that it will be a book about youth sports. I'm sure that won't be popular here in Darien. And I'll be releasing that title very soon. And our second parent university is scheduled for Thursday, January 22nd at 6:30 in the Middlesex Middle School Media Center. The event is designed to help parents navigate the rapidly evolving world of artificial intelligence. So please check your email or the website. There are links to register, and we've been including it in my Friday update. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you. Student representative reports.
Yeah, so many of our students are quickly adjusting back from break with the midterm schedule up and running as of today. Last Wednesday, many of our upperclassmen that were in the National Honor Society participated in our annual Cocoa and Cram, where they instructed and tutored many of the freshmen and new underclassmen who have their first experience to exams this week. And with that, we also have a professional development day on Friday, followed by Martin Luther King Day on Monday. So a nice 4-day weekend in between that exam week as well.
I don't have much to add, just looking forward to the third quarter coming along after midterms.
Thank you, Ryan and Kylie. Moving along to presentations, discussions, and possible action. Presentation and discussion of proposed fiscal 27 budget for schools and curriculum and instruction. Dr. Fettigan.
Before Dr. Fettigan kicks it off, I would like to just say that consistent with our operating standards and with our focus in very specific areas with the overall budget, what you'll see tonight is the through line in terms of when we talked a lot about leadership over the summer and the notion of trust and competence. Similarly, when it comes to teaching and learning, it's all about knowledge and skill of our teachers. So you always have the curriculum side. What is it that we are teaching and what are the materials that we're using? But it's also about the knowledge of our teachers and the skill level of our teachers. So tonight we're going to go a little bit deeper on how it is that we focus on improving that knowledge and skill, and therefore, by extension, improving the student experience and improving the student outcomes. And I think you'll find it very interesting tonight. There's a great through line. There's a tremendous amount of information. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from Dr. Fettigan. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Byrne. And I just want to start by thanking the Board of Education for your continued support in teaching and learning. This is the budget that I'm most excited about in my 3 years in Darien Public Schools. And as Mr. Brown mentioned the other night, This is really a teaching and learning centered budget. So from where I sit here in the organization, we have some really great things planned. As Dr. Byrne mentioned, there is a lot of information in this presentation, but there is a clear through line, as he indicated, and it's really around strengthening instruction by ensuring that our curriculum and our staffing investments are used consistently and effectively across the system. So as we mentioned, we're going to talk tonight about the schools budgets, those RCs. We're going to talk a bit about the visual and performing arts budget and then RC 19. And while there's a lot in this budget, we should expect that tonight's evening is a robust discussion because it's all about teaching and learning. We should be paying careful attention here because that's teaching and learning, after all, is the core function of a school system. So we're going to begin with an overview of the 26 areas of focus. And if you can stay, Mrs. Philpott, on this slide for a little bit. We're going to take a high-level look at the school's budgets first. You have seen the very helpful slide in Dr. Byrne's presentation last week, which provides an at-a-glance of each of the RCs. So I'll be talking about the increases and decreases there. We're also going to be talking about the proposed 5 coaches that support teaching and learning and the other areas of note in the RC 19 budget. So all of our investments, of course, in our school system must be aligned to the vision of the graduate. And what we're doing with our teaching and learning budgets, all of the schools, visual and performing arts and RC 19, is thinking about how do we shape and design instruction so that all of our students are growing in those competencies of curiosity, communication, creativity, empathy, independence, and integrity. We also talked about last week that each of our budget areas should be connected to operational standards. So on this next slide, you'll see with these little graduation caps, which are a nod to the vision of the graduate, these are the operational standards that are most closely connected to teaching and learning. So you won't be surprised to see their excellence in teaching and learning, research-based professional development, continuous instructional program improvement, thinking also about the breadth and depth of academic and extracurricular programs, Board of Education class size guidelines, and of course, programmatic and financial support necessary to continue to grow as a school system. With that overview, let's begin by taking a quick review of the 25-26 areas of focus. And these are our instructional areas of focus that are being funded by this year's FY26 budget. Everyone knows, of course, that we've been really focusing on K-3 literacy instruction through year 1 implementation of a new resource, HMH into Reading. As a reminder, it's not just about that resource, but it's really around instructional practice. And we've committed to significant professional learning to support that. We've also been focusing on writing outcomes, K-8, paying particular attention to how we're instructing students in writing, grammar, and vocabulary development. As you know, we've been talking a lot about how we design curriculum using the UBD framework, understanding by design, and we are committed to meeting the statutory requirement to have all of our courses have scope and sequences written and published in EduPlanet. That supports our teachers at all having access to the current curriculum, and it supports our families in knowing exactly what's happening in classrooms. So that needs to be a continued commitment. We also have been focusing as an instructional leadership team on how, as a group of leaders, we're able to give high quality calibrated feedback around teaching and learning practice. And you've heard about MTSS, you'll hear more about it tonight, and certainly will be a focus area of much of our discussion in the year and years ahead. And that's about really strengthening our instructional program, academic, but also ensuring that we're meeting the needs of the whole child. So now let's take a look, a really high level look at the RCs, the school RC budgets. So RC1, I'll just comment on a few areas to note. The wellness coordinator, I think was mentioned last week, is a result of grant compression and some of that position being put back from the grant onto the operating budget. The Yonder bags, as we know, there was a big investment last year in those bags being purchased for 3 of the grade levels. So we would expect a reduced cost there. And the other bullet point there to note is really around the FTE. And I want to indicate that that's not the loss of a position, it's pieces of a position, and that's completely enrollment predicted. And the result of really program, there's no programmatic change there. It's just around enrollment. Okay. RC3, Middlesex Middle School. Teen Talk is again being supported at Middlesex Middle School. The increase there of $53,940 as a result of grant compression. There are some guidance materials there. It's not a significant cost, but I do think it's worth mentioning. Those resources are going to help some of our work in the year ahead. If if granted, if the budget is approved, to support executive functioning. And I know that's something that as a board we're talking about, and you can anticipate there will probably be a parent university on that coming soon. We also want to note that Mrs. Demoulas has added in her budget 2 stipends for a flex advisor and a world language team leader. Those are really important positions as a part of our curriculum programming, and there currently are not leadership positions in that right now from the stipend list that we have. The FTE reduction there is another reduction that is because of enrollment. We're not reducing any programs in middle school world language, but likely there will be a reduction that we can see due to enrollment through the world language department. The next RC is Hinley. The high level update there is again the opposite of a decrease in enrollment, an increase likely in 5th grade. And for RC7 at Holmes, a 1.0 increase likely in the 1st grade. Now let's take a shift to RC13, Visual and Performing Arts. I know everyone was terribly excited last week about the $49 that, that our Visual and Performing Arts Director, Mrs. Thompson, has found. Again, that was through just really good work and really looking closely at software programs. We should also note that the general teaching supplies, when Mrs. Thompson and I spoke about this, it looks like it's a big decrease, but really that's just how she's organized the department. It used to be that she was supervising just the music department, and now because we're looking at visual and performing arts together as departments, she was able to realize some savings, again, without impacting program. And then there's the natural repairs and service contracts for all of the music instruments. She has the 5-year cycle for instrument replacement. I believe within this budget, we're on year 3 of 5 of that. And of course, the tuning of our pianos. So those are the types of things that are in there. There are no significant program changes. I will note that we have a tri-state follow-up happening in just a couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to sharing the results of that with the board. Okay, and now the long-awaited curriculum and instruction areas of focus. So as we shift to the curriculum and instruction RC19 budget, I want to point out that there are 5 large areas in teaching and learning that we're going to focus. They'll be very central to our strategic plan. You should be able to see a through line as we discuss those. Additionally, with the expenditure highlights, that's where I'll go into greater detail about the instructional coaches. I know that last week there were a few questions raised around the instructional coaches, namely, what would the roles and responsibilities be? How would we measure success with implementation of coaching models? What would be the impact to student learning outcomes, and what metrics might we use to measure those? And how would that strategy connect to the overarching goals in our strategic plan? So that's something that I will discuss when we go into the expenditure highlights. I do first want to take just a couple of minutes to go over those areas that are our main areas of focus. So the first one won't surprise you, is literacy. And the way I organized these content slides are, if we do those things that are in those budget areas, the result should be that we have a coherent evidence-based literacy system that strengthens both early foundational literacy skills and supports and accelerates student growth as they move up through the grades. And one of the questions I know that probably likely is on your mind is, what is happening now that we've really invested so much in PK3? What's happening in grades 4 and 5? I'd like to shift us away from that question and have us think bigger picture. We really should be asking, how are we developing an articulated preschool through grade 12 program for literacy instruction? A program that is coherent and provides seamless transitions for students as they move grade over grade and level to level, elementary, middle, and high. A big item that we'll be talking about not only tonight, but in future board meetings at the curriculum committee level, and I'm sure at this board table, is adopting a CSDE approved universal literacy screener. We do currently have a screener in place. It's important to note that because of the right to read legislation, we have to pick from an approved program, a list of approved universal screeners. While our current universal screener is on that list, we do believe that there's a universal screener that will be more useful to us. It's really important that we not only have data, but we have the right data, and that we're able to use the data to inform instructional practice. And there is a different screener that we're looking at, which would come in at a higher cost. And the other important thing to notice is, as we make a shift to multi-tiered systems of support, and we're looking not only at academics, but behavior and social and personal learning, it's important that we think about a universal screener for behavior. And that was paid for in previous years by the state. The DESA, that is no longer paid for by the state. And so that is a cost in the budget that would make that standardized assessment line go up. We also are thinking about resource alignment, K-3. We want to make sure that we're investing in aligning our curriculum to the resource, because remember that the resource is just a tool to help us accomplish what students need to know and be able to do at the grade levels. We'll also be thinking about instructional gaps and transitions across the grade levels. So Dr. Falcone and Kristen Colonies have already begun their work with leading a district literacy leadership team, a PK-12 steering committee, and a group that's looking really specifically at the 3 through 6 grade level bands. So we can pick up where we left off on PK through 3, think about those upper elementary grades, and also be thinking about 6th grade, because what we know from teachers and parents and some students is that it can be a big jump to move from 5th grade to 6th grade. So we want to smooth out those transitions. We also want to make sure that we have a system in place before we jump to a new resource in those upper grades for our teachers to really look and leaders thoughtfully at our current programming and resources and make really informed decisions and do a gap analysis of what might we be missing and where we can find some improvements. And we'll always be, of course, communicating progress and priorities to the board as we move along. The next major focus area is multi-tiered systems of support. And these first 2 screens are really closely connected, because remember that multi-tiered systems of support is about having a really strong core instructional program and aligned supports to provide interventions at tiers 2 and 3 and a seamless transition to special education services for those students who require specialized instruction. And so you'll see that the work we're doing in the area of literacy is really around strengthening tier 1 core instruction. It's a big part of MTSS. The universal screener that we need is to help us understand where all students are performing, and that's administered 3 times a year. And we're thinking also that we need a data dashboard that's more user-friendly for our staff. We currently have a data dashboard in the budget. It's been in the budget for several years in Darien Public Schools. But once again, it's not really helping us to leverage the data that we have to inform instructional decision-making. So we want the data that we have to be useful and easily accessible and used to plan for a next level of learning for our students. We also are supporting whole child development. We've talked about before in RC 1 and 3, those commitments to the Wellness Center Coordinator and Teen Talk. And there's some really exciting work planned for MMS in the Flex and Advisory Program. And that would be addressed through curriculum and some other resources at the school. The next major focus area is PK-12 curriculum development. In my view, this should be a slide that you see every single year come budget time, because if we're not revising our curriculum, then it becomes stale. Curriculum needs to remain current so that it's engaging for our learners and so that it's relevant to current times. And so we're going to make sure, of course, that as we revise curriculum, that we're hitting the content standards, and we're also making strong connections to vision of the graduate. We've made a really significant commitment, Mrs. Klein and I, to ensure that we have special educators at the table as general education curriculum is being designed. And that really supports access and principles of universal design for learning. Additionally, in this curriculum development cycle, we're going to be thinking about the NGSS assessment, and that's that science assessment for next generation science standards. And we want to make sure that our assessments are providing our learners with the opportunity, our young scientists, to see questions and engage in authentic performance tasks like they'll see on that standardized measure. We remain committed to providing advanced placement experiences for our learners, and we know from our earlier data presentation in the fall, we've had great success there, and it's time to revise some of those curricular courses in social studies. We also have exciting courses that you heard about. Mrs. Dunn presented on new courses, and those are driven by student interest, and we're also closing out the American Sign Language World Language option for our students there. And again, we'll be talking consistently throughout this year and next about executive functioning skill development and how that's integrated into other curricular areas so that there's transfer for our students. The next area of focus is 612 student success plans. And you've heard me say before that these plans are legislated. The big idea behind these plans is to really strengthen communication between school personnel, students, and families. And it's intended that every student has goals that they're working on that are student driven by their own interests that are supporting their college and career future planning. And so that's meant to, again, support communication and support individual growth for our students. And what we'll do with that is think about making clear connections to the curriculum, and we'll explore options to look at how we create student portfolios to document as students are moving through the grades. And we'll be able to show there some connections to vision of the graduate. We currently have a software program that we use in district called Naviance. And those of you who have had high school students and have gone through college, placement, you'll be familiar with that Naviance software program. We know that we can better leverage that program to support this area of our work. So that's not necessarily a new cost. It's just using that software that we have really efficiently and effectively. And the final major commitment area in the budget is research-based professional learning. There's a commitment here to continue to expand the Orton Gillingham Academy, to think about refining PLC practices that are actually connected to MTSS. So that would mean really thinking about how do we have protocols to look at student data and have discussions about that and plan as professional learning communities to support how children are functioning in tiers 1, 2, and 3. We'll also be thinking most especially around the instructional coaches and how we leverage those to strengthen elementary teaching and learning. And there's some exciting work that's proposed and I think was negotiated in the recent contract for credit-bearing professional learning opportunities for our staff. And that's really exciting because we can get really creative and have a lot of our professional learning be staff-driven by their interests. And so there's some commitment in this budget to grow in that area. And I think that's very exciting work. We might be the only district in Connecticut. We might be on the front end of that. That idea came from the and Dr. Byrne. Okay, so here we're going to shift to RC 19, and this is where we're going to have more information. I'll share more about our thinking behind the strategy of having instructional coaches. And I'll revisit the questions that were raised the other night, as I indicated earlier in the presentation. And then after the discussion on coaches, I'll go through just some of the areas of note for increase and decrease in the rest of these line items. So Board Chair Mrs. Nelson mentioned in her earlier remarks tonight that 80% nearly of our staff is related to staff. It's 80% of the budget is related to staff, budget, and insurance, staffing and insurance costs. And that's to note that we are really a human-related industry. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because really the interest of bringing coaches in district is around investing in our human capital and professional capital. It's to ensure that our curriculum and our staffing investment is aligned and supported and used effectively. The main point here is that we want to protect our return on investment with other budget areas that you're hearing about tonight. And we will see a positive impact to student learning. And I'll also talk about the metrics that we'll use to have evidence of that. The challenge in many school districts is that you have a curriculum. We spend more than 6 figures in our curriculum writing and revision annually. And without ongoing job embedded support, there's differences in how that curriculum is implemented. So there's kind of variability from classroom to classroom, which creates uneven implementation and uneven student experiences. And so what we have to do also is think about how we can use coaches to develop shared experiences for teaching and learning practice. So we have common practices and we reduce those gaps. We do know that we are performing a very high performing district in the top 5% of the state. And so that's the result of having a strong curriculum in place and really talented educators that are working day in and day out on the front line with our students. And that's through years of investment from this board and previous boards. But often in high performing districts, the biggest risks you have are kind of invisible. And so that's really, again, the variance from classroom to classroom. A large annual test score like the standardized assessment in SBA or NGSS, we wouldn't expect to see large increases there as a result of implementing instructional coaches. Test scores alone are not the only or most appropriate indicator for success. So I'll be talking about 3 different types of metrics that we'll use. Imagine, for example, there are 2 third graders that have the same curriculum. Everything looks aligned, but in the classrooms, their experience is different because maybe one teacher has that kind of ongoing support and professional learning. If the other didn't, over time, those small differences would add up. And you would see over time a really significant difference between outcomes for students in those types of different learning environments. In a high-performing district, the focus really needs to be on maintaining strong results, reducing the differences in instructional and curriculum implementation, and sustaining quality over time. This is particularly important as we implement a new resource and as we think about strengthening our multi-tiered systems of support, because again, that's all around strengthening the core instruction. So we want to make sure that we're really clear tonight about the role of what elementary coach is, an elementary instructional coach. An instructional coach is a really hands-on position. They work directly day in and day out with teachers. These are not school-related positions. They're really district positions so that we can be intentional with how we deploy that resource. They would be working side by side with teachers to support the effective use of our curriculum and our curriculum resources. They would be working to improve that consistency across classroom settings. They would be modeling lessons. They would be co-teaching with our staff. They would be supporting lesson planning, and they would also be supporting our teachers in looking at student data to plan thoughtfully for instruction. With instructional coaches, we would want to implement really clear expectations and structured coaching cycles for them to engage in that work together. So it would be very planful. I want to once again be really explicit about the connection to MTSS. I've said this a few times tonight. It's really so much of what happens in our learning outcomes, even beyond standardized measures, is dependent upon having strong Tier 1 instruction. That should result in fewer students requiring additional interventions over time. It should also help us to more readily identify learning needs and to be more efficient and accurate in how we plan for intervention. Why instructional coaching? Well, as you indicated, Mrs. Nelson, that human capital is our most important resource in the school system. And when teachers feel supported in the classroom where it matters most, that's where we can know that there will be impact real time when they're in there with their students. There's daily job embedded support. And coaching, we know, isn't about remediation. It's a strategy for us to maintain excellence. You may, if you work in different industries, be aware of coaching in your own industries. There's coaching in business and healthcare and aviation, of course, in professional sports for executives and surgeons and pilots. And that coaching is not because there's a weakness, right? Derek Jeter didn't have a coach because he was a weak baseball player. It's really around sustaining excellence and requiring that feedback is leveraged so that there can be continuous improvement in practice. It would be the same thing for us in education. It would be about supporting our skilled workforce to maintain excellence, to provide feedback. That's really what we would be going after. I was thinking of different analogies that I could offer tonight. And, what are some things that you invest in as a person or as a human that you might not really see a huge impact so soon, but it's really important to your existence. And that might be like when you go for an annual physical exam. You don't leave the doctor's office and suddenly burst into a new state of health where you have all of these improvements. Your joints work better and your blood pressure immediately goes down, your allergies are cured. But you do go for annual physicals because it is important to monitor the essential systems within your body. It is important to identify those incremental small issues early that, if not addressed, become bigger, more costly, maybe more catastrophic issues later that require more significant interventions. So again, our goal with implementing coaching would not be for short-term gains. It would really be around protecting the instructional health of our school system. I wanted to talk, and I mentioned this earlier tonight, right before our meeting. We will be really thoughtful about the measures and metrics we use. Of course, this is a significant investment to have instructional coaches in a district. And we would be looking at mainly 3 different types of measures to talk about impact, success, how we would define success, and how we would make a connection to student learning. Those measures would be implementation measures, and I'll give you an example of what that might be. That would be the percentage, for example, of classrooms where the curriculum is being implemented as intended. It could be how coaching cycles are completed across the schools. It could be how our lesson plans are actually aligned to the instructional framework in the district and the outcomes we're looking for. We will also, the second kind of measure we'll use is instructional quality measures. And we would have evidence of improvement there when we look at rubrics that we use, and our school leaders and our department leaders use those to help improve teaching and learning in the classroom. We would be able to measure that without so much, we'd be looking for, again, less variance across instructional practice, and we would be looking for teacher feedback. The other piece, of course, the piece that seems maybe most obvious are the student outcomes. So there would be a look at standardized measures, including the Smarter Balanced Assessment and more local assessments, including universal screener that I mentioned before, progress monitoring, different benchmark assessments, and unit assessments. So you can see that it would be really complex, and we would have to have varied multiple measures in thinking about the effectiveness of such implementing a coaching model. There is a tool also that Dr. Byrne and I have been talking about, and it's a concerns-based adoption model. It's called CBAM. You can probably, some of you in different practice and in other industries may have heard of that before. And that tool is very useful in helping to understand the impact and the success of the human side of change, right? So how do teachers experience a new instructional resource or a new practice? What is their level of confidence? I'm sure that Mrs. Sion and I would be looking at teacher retention. As I mentioned before, when teachers are supported in their practice and they feel really good about the work that they're doing in classrooms, they're more likely to stay. This is especially important with early career staff. We would expect a reduced reliance on external PD. I know that we're all aware that we have these early release days that are happening, and the cost to that is that's really interruptive to an instruction. It's a challenge for families, but beyond that, that's really interruptive to the teaching and learning flow, right? The instructional school day for a child. So this would be more effective because we would have the support built in real time with the kids right in front of teacher and coach. So why 5 coaches, you might ask? We really know that coaching is a relationship-centered strategy. Like Mrs. Nelson said, it's really around human capital. And we want to make sure that we have enough of that resource to provide support evenly across classrooms in all of our schools. And we want to make sure that there is enough of that resource to provide depth to really have a positive influence on instruction. So overall, coaching really, I would want to posit that it's really a risk management. It's really a risk management strategy. It's about protecting excellence. And if we don't, those minor incremental kind of things that become less healthy in a system can in time have a really large impact on performance and outcomes. Before I answer, because I know that there probably will likely be some questions about coaches, I just want to make note of a few other line items in RC 19. Curriculum development that increases basically because of the annual increase in rate for curriculum writing on payroll. Consultant services, that line went up because we have planned in there to do some work with somebody that Dr. Byrne has had great success with before, who is an expert in MTSS and data individualization. And that is an area, that data literacy is an area where we really need to grow as a school system. Additionally, we have professional textbooks, I should say. That line went down significantly. That should not surprise you. Last year, there was a significant investment in our new K-3 literacy resource, and we will not be adopting a new resource next year in grades 4 through 5 because, of course, we're going to approach that work in a really planful way, as we did in PK3, and we'll be apprising the board of that as we go. The next presentation where we'll be discussing that at greater length will be on Thursday. So we'll look forward to sharing that. Dr. Falcone and Kristen Colonies will be here to help lead that discussion. Resource materials, that's a pretty significant decrease. And that's because last year in the FY26 budget, there was a major investment in ELP and kindergarten classrooms for play-based learning furniture and equipment. And Dr. Byrne even purchased some additional materials this week, some food supplies for their little kitchens. The standardized assessment or standardized testing line went up. And as I mentioned before, there's a universal screener that we think will be likely better for us to use, more utilitarian. That is more costly. And again, the DESA is no longer covered by the state. So that's the reason why that line went up. I just really would want to, again, thank you for, this is a robust conversation. It should be. Teaching and learning is what our entire system is about. And I do believe that this ask, although it is significant, is really responsible governance because we've discussed appropriate measures for success. It's really about protecting strong performance and maintaining excellence and ensuring long-term stability. And excellence doesn't sustain itself. We have to be really strategic as a district, make strategic choices, and maintain our excellence with intention and focus. And I would argue that this budget will do that. All right, and then I think Mrs. Philpott just had that tonight happened. And the next, as Dr. Byrne mentioned, January 20th, my colleague Shirley Klein is up next. And you can see this calendar of events there and where you can send questions in between.
Thank you very much for that very robust presentation. And I am personally really excited about how this budget in particular is extremely focused on our very kind of core academics, literacy, and MTSS, Orton Gillingham, all of these things that I think we have, as a board, have talked about for quite a long time. And I'm excited to see kind of the outcome of this. And you did cover some of the how we plan to do this from a systems perspective or technology. And I know just from reading over the budget book, it did seem to me that MTSS in particular seems to kind of span across multiple responsibility centers. And I know you touched on kind of some of them that are in RC19, but the big question I have is, do we in this budget have the systems and resources and technology kind of budgeted so that we can do what you need to do with MTSS and then with the, individualization using the data literacy. And I think this probably also touches on RC24 with special education. So just to make sure that in order to do all of the things that you're looking at doing from an instructional standpoint, that we have the resources. So I don't know if you have any more clarity that you could provide on that.
Well, we do. And, there are some things that we actually have in FY26 that are not functioning in the way to help us accomplish some of what you just mentioned. So we've been very planful, and it should be that you see MTSS show up in different RCs because it's a comprehensive systemic framework. So we would expect that there would be elements of MTSS related to our curriculum writing and ensuring that we have universal design for learning and access for all of our kiddos and aligned resources throughout all of the tiers. We would expect to see elements of MTSS in our computer software budget. So that does make sense that you would see those in standardized testing because of a universal screener. So I think that you want to see that. And this FY27 budget does, we believe, especially with a universal screener that is more robust and will help us shape instruction more, will better meet our needs. And the data dashboard we've been paying for year over year in district, and it's cumbersome. It's not efficient for our staff to use. And so some of this cost has been in our budgets historically. And I think that likely the data dashboard will come in cost neutral or maybe even less.
So I would say the short answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
We've looked across all of the RCs for what are the essential components that we need to implement a robust MTSS system. And yes, we have what we need to do that. It will take time. So what I envision happening is much of what you heard tonight, you're going to hear in about a year as we're planning the FY28 budget. Because the reality is, in the world of change, which is what we are pushing toward, which is why we need job embedded coaching, which is why we need in-service courses. We have to hit the teacher knowledge and skill piece from multiple areas in order to move that forward. And it will move at a snail's pace. I used to get beat up by my board in Rye, particularly my board president, Jane, because I would say baby steps. You need to take the baby steps now, because at a certain point, we will then be taking giant steps, because the foundational elements that need to be put in place well, and they need to be put in place thoughtfully. And that the coaching, the data analysis, the skill in analyzing the data, the systems to capture the data, and the communication piece. Our universal screener, none of you have ever seen your child's universal screener. That's not helpful in building a solid MTSS process. So the universal screener that we'll be selecting, or at least in my mind, the one we'll be selecting, we'll also have reporting features for families so that we can have those conversations early on, what your child needs. Connecticut didn't pick legislation around reading because we were accomplishing everything we needed to in reading. Connecticut picked reading for legislation, as did many states, because there were areas that we were missing the boat on. All of us, we weren't doing such a great job with phonics and phonemic awareness. And there's so many elements to that. It's understanding how each learner processes those letters, how they hear the letters, how they see the letters, how they say the letters, and it's building the systems to support that development in an effective manner and building the systems at the same time to intervene when kids need extra help. So that wasn't a short answer. That was a really long answer. But the short part was the yes. So we are confident that the pieces we need to make all that happen are here. We need some time and we will be disciplined about it. And we as a governance team want to be disciplined about focusing. We want you to keep us on task. If we come back next year and everything we're talking about in the budget sounds different, we're doing something wrong because we're shifting to whack-a-mole, and whack-a-mole is not what's best for our kids. It's steady, focused, targeted work that's going to move us forward with all of these pieces in place.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Joanna? Or Shirley had a follow-up, I think.
Well, it's hard to follow Dr. Burns' comment on the whole OG analysis of what we're doing with instruction in phonics. But I just wanted to add the second part to your question, Robin, which was the revised MTSS structure really is in response to the self-study. When we looked last year in May, when we presented the idea of tier 1 intervention, tier 2 intervention, and what we could do, and monitoring that and looking gaps in that, I think it's a direct response. And that's what the entire steering committee was working on. So I think it's a clear relation and nexus to going from MTSS to pre-referral to prior interventions and to looking, to Amy's point, at a really strong tier 1 rigorous process in interventions in the regular classroom, general classroom.
Thank you. Joanna, you had a question.
So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into instructional coaches. I know in New Canaan, they have something like this already. It's been very successful. They started out with just one, and now I think they have 2 or 3. So I have a couple detailed questions, like, operationally, is it that 5 are just deployed where they're needed, or is it 1 per school? Are they going to be coaches for all curriculum, like even full class? What else will they cover besides literacy, which I imagine is sort of the way that we walked into this? And, will they only be coaching? Will they be doing direct interventionist work with students or anything of that nature? But more,
Sure.
less fire hosy.
Yeah. No. That's absolutely.
Okay, we have a lot of programs that we've brought in over the years. We have a lot of different PD that's been going on. How are we making sure that the coaching and the sort of new way forward is everybody rowing in the same direction and not 15 different uses of past going up each
So
other?
I'll start, we could tag team this.
All right,
So-
let's try.
So one, coaches will be central. They will be out of the district office under the supervision of the director of elementary. And their primary focus will be in classrooms, working side by side with teachers. So in the course of a day, you could have a coach that is over at Ox Ridge working with a number of teachers in a coaching cycle, which is a lengthy period of time. So depending on what we determine, it could be a 3 to 4 week coaching cycle where they're working with the same person with the same area of focus for 3 to 4 weeks on that one area. And they could be working with multiple teachers at the same time. That's going to be determined as we move forward with the work with teachers. That being said, depending on the coaches we hire and their skill levels, we'll deploy them appropriately. So we may find that we have people that have great strength in K1. The way we had it set up in Rye, we had a K2 literacy coach and a 3-5 literacy coach. It was based on their experiences and their strengths, and they worked off of that. So they worked across all of the schools in those targeted areas. If, as we go through the hiring process, we see that, and that's often the case where you find really good, strong primary teachers, you put the best primary teacher support with the primary teachers. So that's something we'll work off of. There will be spaces in the buildings so that coaches have a workroom when they bring teachers out of the classroom. Ross Cooper was talking to us tonight about the space he's got identified at Hindley. So if a coach is working with the team of second grade teachers at Hindley, they could be doing a model lesson in the classroom, working with kids at the same time. So they're not doing intervention for kids, but they're using the work with kids as the modeling for teachers. So they will have direct interaction with students, but as the coach in that role of coaching. So after all the teaching happens in the classroom, on a prep, they could be meeting and debriefing. What did we do? Why did we do it? What went well? How would you do this in your own classroom? That kind of. So those were some of them. I know you might want to jump in and add some more on that.
So I think the other thing that I would add is you asked about intervention. And so as we have interventionists currently in place in the system, it will be really important. And Dr. Byrne and Dr. Falcone and I have talked about this to be really clear about what the roles are. And when you think about MTSS, we have interventionists that are really currently supporting tier 2 and tier 3. Right. The primary function of the coach is strengthening the core tier 1.
Right.
So thinking about how we integrate the function of both of those roles and triangulate that with a classroom teacher will be really important part of our work.
I'd also say the coaches are one of the tools in getting the consistency and alignment, both horizontally and vertically within the system. So instead of you have that coach that's working across multiple schools so that you can ensure that what's happening in second grade class at Oxbridge is what's happening in a second grade class at Hindley and Holmes and Royal and Tokenique. And you know, you have that ability with the coach being across all those areas to ensure that consistency and alignment.
And, you know, classroom teachers typically are really familiar with their grade level content standards and thinking about the learning progressions therein. And an instructional coach is uniquely positioned to know what the standards are in the grade level before and after. So that also helps with being really intentional with planning and differentiated instruction because it's a longer view and really, you know, meeting kids where they are, whether it's not quite there yet at grade level or beyond.
Katie?
Thank you. To stay on that thread with the coaches, first I wanted to say how helpful it was to hear you kind of lay out the work that they would be doing from the logistics of where they're placed and how they will help alignment through moving through that. So thank you for that. I did want to just follow up a little bit more on how they will be involved in MTSS and in SES identification. So as they are in there, right, they're looking for deficiencies, for ways to strengthen the instruction in all classroom, but since they'll also be working with kids and modeling and they'll be in there, will they be consulting with teachers about, I was working with this student and they seem to be behind? Will they then attend PPTs or that kind of thing?
They won't be attending PPTs, but part of the coaching process is identifying if there's individual students that have needs, figuring out strategies to implement in the classroom to support them. So that would be part of it. And helping teachers to analyze data. So another connection to this, the consultant that Amy mentioned with database individualization, he would also, Devin Kearns, who we know through the Haskins Institute and Haskins Global Literacy Hub, he really helps you to identify the right data and track that data over time to see how kids are doing. So he'll also work with teachers and coaches on that aspect as well.
And so in that vein, then that will also be work done with the special education teachers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the coaches as well.
Yep.
Like not just the classroom, but also with the interventionists.
Yes.
And really, Katie, it's an important question. MTSS is to smooth out those, like to really make a strong through line so that it's not start and stops with all of those different roles in the system.
Great, thank you.
Great, and then Sarah.
Just real quick follow-up on the instructional coaches. It seems like a really interesting idea, and I know I'd asked some questions about it before. These are a bit more like at the beginnings, like it's a new position that we're not familiar with in Darien because we've never had them before. Are these people who are readily available? How are we going to find them? I guess it sounds like New Canaan has found some of these folks. Like, what's like the background of these types of people? Are they, you know?
They're generally master teachers. So there's a specific certification area in Connecticut for coaches. So the positions are out there. And we would have a robust search process for identifying them.
So there's like a marketplace for them with market comp, market background, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Sarah?
So that was my question is how do you find 5 qualified, excellent people at the same time? But also going back to, and I really appreciate that we're talking about improving what our education of our teachers, because it's not necessarily what we're teaching, it's how we're teaching and who's in front of our children that is teaching us. And I very much appreciate the focus on that. To that point, it's really hard to have, and I know that around this table, we really like to talk about metrics. How do we know this is working? Because it's not going to be, the scores are increasing 10% because of we now have instructional coaches. It's less, it's harder to point a finger to that. How do you envision this? We know that this is a return on investment that is worth it.
It's an excellent question, and I think similar to that health example, like you're not going to see a dramatic increase, right, in your blood pressure level, but you feel better, and there's overall health that you're looking for. We're going to have 3 different types of measures. So we'll be looking at the implementation measures. So there would be some evidence to suggest if it's working or not when we're thinking about consistent implementation of curriculum. As we're looking at classroom practice, how people are working in coaching cycles. There would be documentation of that. We would have instructional quality measurements that we would use, and that's through observed classroom practice. We would, of course, be looking at standardized measures and other assessment types. And that CBAM model that we were talking about before, concerns-based adoption model, really is around how we would measure our staff experience in their work in district with implementing curriculum, applying instructional strategies, and their work with coaches. So there would be feedback from staff too.
But I would also say that tracking the data over time, not necessarily a standardized measure that's given on one day in the course of the school year, but looking at the universal screener, and particularly most of the screeners now, you get growth targets and growth measures. We will be able to analyze that deeper and see if that line is changing, if the growth is improving, because trying to measure based on an achievement level is very difficult in a community with performance like us. But looking at growth within those measures. So when we're examining the screeners, finding a screener that does have a growth measure component of it and being able to track that over time and see the impact. And it'll be great because starting with the new universal screener next year, when we're starting with the coaches, we'll have baseline right out of the gate to look at that. And then tracking the other internal measures. So even simple things like we're using a new resource that has a much better focus on phonics and phonemic awareness. If we are tracking how kids are doing on the Haggerty assessments and look at that over time, I suspect we're going to see increased performance for our kids on those assessments over time. And then the other piece, which I'm not going to talk about out loud, is when those things start happening and start improving, you start to see longer term impacts and gains on lots of other areas across the system.
And the idea of having a data dashboard that actually helps us look at different types of assessments to be really much more diagnostic with how we're supporting teaching and learning will be really an important part.
It's the ability to look at them, but also the ability for our
To use
teachers
them.
and our staff to use them for instructional planning purposes.
And then again, not to have my fire hose out, but curious about the push in and pull out. So it sounds like they'll be in the classrooms most of the time.
Yeah.
Is there a way to, could you pull a second grade teacher from Tokenique with a second grade teacher from Royal? Is there a way, would they be doing that kind of work as well, or not so? Was that part of the PLC work?
Part of the PLC work, but it's, we always hear from our teachers that they're very eager to work with their colleagues in same
Right.
grade level across the district. And that's part of that idea of reducing variance. So when we think about the different opportunities we have for professional learning, there will absolutely be time for grade levels to come together.
Yeah.
And, the coaches are their own kind of little PLC, right? And what they discuss about their practice working across the schools will be really important as well.
And coaches will also be teaching in-service courses, which will be the new out-of-school
Okay.
option for moving teachers along in their practice.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in to follow up on that point? So Eric, I really appreciate what you just said about the long-term gains and how we will see this show up in other places beyond our first grade classroom. So I'd like to request, in terms of our follow-up, that this board, as we begin looking at those upper grades, that 3 to 6, to see what they need, that we are taking note of the deficiencies that we are experiencing right now in the literacy, writing, grammar of our middle school and our high school students, and that we take that long-term lens to see what happens, from the elementary students, let's say of 2 to 3 years from now, after this has been working, what do they look like in middle school and high school? And, I imagine that quite a few people in this room will have shifted out of their seats, but I think that is the kind of view that we really want to know about what we're planning today.
All about the long game.
We've been really strategic, and we'll talk in greater detail about this on Thursday, with ensuring that we have a district literacy leadership team that's looking at just that, and then a PK-12 steering committee, so that we always have the long range view. This year, we're shifting from K3 to grades 3 through 6 for exactly what you're talking about. How do we make sure we build off of what happened PK3 and extend into those upper grades? We don't want to stop in grade 5 because we want to have it support a smooth transition into the middle school. So we've set up an advisory structure for that work moving forward.
Absolutely.
Talk about it on Thursday.
Okay, John, I know you have a question.
Yeah, just back to the instructional quality measurements and the dashboards. I can see why that would be very helpful for your internal purposes. How is that data potentially shared externally with parents? What's the parents' view of that?
Well, certainly assessment data that we collect on individual students, parents should be aware of that information. So for example, the Haggerty assessment that I mentioned for youngest learners, that's information that's reported out to parents, maybe not necessarily the score, but when you get a progress report and you have your parent conference. But the universal screener information that we have not historically given to families, we will be giving to families beginning next year.
And just to kind of, again, could be being slower on this, but you also mentioned the metrics such as the percentage of classrooms where the curriculum is being implemented correctly or along the benchmark ways.
I'm sorry,
You mentioned the metrics in terms of percentage of classrooms in the school where curriculum is being implemented, right? So less parent information on the student level, but more on the individual teachers and classrooms. That can be something that's
data that we report out to parents. No, we would rectify that to make sure that it's implemented properly. That's the whole point of this, so that we don't have to go to those kinds of measures.
Okay, yes, Bill?
Dr. Finnegan, thank you. The deep thought behind all this is very obvious, and appreciate the presentation tonight. I'm just going to circle back for one quick question on the universal literacy screener. I understand that the state provides a menu of options. And my question is just really simple. Are you satisfied with that? Would you like to go off the menu? Because I think we should support you to get you the data you need. If you're not satisfied, we may have to use the state, but if you want to use something else that more appropriately meets your needs, I would be interested in hearing if that's something you would like.
Thank you for recognizing that type of resource in our work is really critical. We are not currently satisfied with the universal screener that we have in place. It's not been an effective tool for teachers and leaders to use to drive instruction. It has not been shared with parents how students are improving. We do believe on that approved list that there is a screener that will better meet our needs and help us to kind of move the dial on teaching and learning when we think about kind of the smaller incremental baby steps that Dr. Byrne is talking about. So we do believe that exists, and we've been really studying that tool among
You would
others.
be happy.
We'd be happy with it.
Thank you.
Mhm. It is more expensive, but we don't want to pay for a tool, that is already costly, that is not really of use to us. So
Very
we
much.
found-
Thank you.
Katie?
Thank you. I want to come back to I'm sorry, we're jumping back and forth with topics with you guys. Thank you for bearing with us. I want to come back to the dashboard for a second. And then I also just want to sort of restate something that you said, Eric, because John, you had a question about this, and I think a lot of other people could be as well. And considering this is a budget where people vote on it, it's good to clarify. Regarding the ways that you guys are continuously monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of the coaches and those metrics. I just want to reiterate that that's an ongoing thing, that every day that the coaches are in those classrooms, they're taking note of those things and they're bringing feedback back up through you, Amy, and your department. And as they change cycles, to how you mentioned that they would kind of be a professional development cohort, they're talking to each other about what they're seeing. So it's not so much that they're getting a scorecard or a report card for a percentage of classroom. It's more like an ongoing, okay, when we started, we had X percentage that we're implementing correctly. Now with our support, we've seen that grow, and now so is that correct?
Yes,
With
that is correct, but it's really, it's a fine line that they walk because they're not evaluating teachers, they're not observing teachers. When they're in there, they're observing, but it's observed to support.
Right.
So it's our job as administrators, principals, assistant principals, coordinators, chairs, to do that evaluative piece. So coaches are not evaluative in any way, but they are obviously taking note of what the needs are. And when the coaches come together as a team, they're talking about what are the needs and what do they need to address. Or if they're seeing that some component of the program is giving teachers trouble, then they're going to strategize as a team. What do we need to do to address this appropriately and support the teachers?
So very
Their work
important
will
point.
help inform curriculum,
Mhm.
right? How they see curriculum being implemented and also professional learning needs.
Mhm.
They're looking for trends in that.
So I appreciate that clarification. So they're not administrators.
No,
They
they're
are
teachers.
classified as teachers.
They are classified as teachers with a coach certification.
Great,
Mhm.
okay. So then shifting to the dashboard. Can you just talk a little bit more about how that will be used? Is it an internal tool? Will it have push out functions? Just kind of so that the average parent community member will kind of understand how it is helping the district and teachers and administrators, but then also what the sort of parent and student facing component might be.
So it's primarily an internal tool, and what it helps with is looking at individual student, classroom, school, and district trend data. And so that's how we would use that. It really will help us triangulate data. It really would not be, we wouldn't necessarily be putting out reports from the data dashboard for families. However, as Dr. Byrne mentioned before, the universal screener, we will be sharing individual student data from that type of tool and resource.
But I also think the data dashboard will help our teachers and administrators to understand the larger picture of data, because it will be in one place where it is not right now. So we have lots of different assessments and information we gather on kids as we think about our instruction, but it's not in one place where we can actually do some in-depth analysis. This will enable us to do that at a teacher level, administrator level, and then apply interventions to address that.
And in that way, sitting with a parent, it would be easier to look at triangulated data or
Right.
data across many sittings and different types of data to help make sense of student
And to have
progress.
more informed database conversations with parents when you have a conference.
And this would last year over year
Yeah,
Yes.
this stays.
with the
We have it.
student profile.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
So I want to follow up just on the data, the dashboard kind of pieces. I understand this is more of an internal tool.
Yep.
As a board, it would be interesting, and I would look to you to say what is the cadence and the timing of when you might be able to report some kind of data and effectiveness and outcomes kind of measures at the board level on how these things are working, which would be extremely important for us as a board.
So we wouldn't be able to add this component to next fall's assessment report. But I would envision that our local assessment information that will be coming from the data dashboard will be part of that fall assessment presentation that we do to the board and community.
Great.
So if you think back, that was mainly standardized tests and AP scores and things like that. They'll also now will be able to have a component on our local assessments using the data dashboard to bring that information to you.
Okay, so that we can kind
Trends and
of
patterns.
see the patterns, the growth, not only from instructional coaches, but just all of the different kind of
Across,
screeners,
yeah,
everything that you're
yep.
doing. And then right now, the instructional coaches are focused on elementary. But as you're talking about progression and growth and being able to track this over time, what would the plan be to be able to have similar kinds of things available for parents of, for instance, middle school students or high school? And I think this would get into the student success plans and kind of how we're looking at growth opportunities and goals for students and portfolios. And so, I mean, it's exciting kind of stuff. And I understand it'll take a while
Right.
to do all of these things, but obviously you have to focus on the elementary first. Are there plans in the future potentially to do things more like this as we kind of get into higher level grades?
There certainly could be down the road. It wouldn't be at the same scale.
Right.
But we also have different kinds of positions at the secondary level that are much more content specific, coordinators, department chairs that function in somewhat in that role. You don't have that at the elementary level. You
Okay.
have your building administrators that have tremendous administrative responsibilities that prevent them from being coaches on a regular basis with teachers, and they're evaluative. So there are aspects of the kind of work, but I wouldn't necessarily see just coming back to you in 5 years and saying, we need another 5 coaches to put at the secondary.
Right.
It's a different structure and a different model.
Okay, so I mean, the focus to be on elementary literacy specifically because that's the root kind of foundation that impacts
Yes.
everything kind of going forward.
Certainly right now.
Yes.
We also
okay.
know that elementary teachers are often generalists. So when
Right.
we're looking, we're going to be looking for teachers with great skill, coaches with great skill in literacy. But we're also going to be exploring where are they with mathematics, because that's the other key area at the elementary level that could be helpful to us down the road.
And we know a lot of how children perform in mathematics is impacted by their ability to
They're
read.
reading. Yeah.
Do these types of instructional coaches typically specialize in literacy or are there both?
It
where they're
depends.
math
In
and-
different models, you
Okay.
have different ways of doing it. So, you know, the best place, I think Greg was asking, where do you find these? I mean, you really go out and poach. So you look for, I'm an equal opportunity poacher. You go out and you find, and frankly, we're in a really good position and the changes that were negotiated in the contract that the board supported are going to help us recruit people into these roles. But we know, New York City, people look down on the New York City system. New York City has had instructional coaches in place for years. And some of the most skilled teachers we ever see coming through our doors are people who have been coaches in New York City and are moving to the suburbs, moving to Connecticut, and these roles don't typically exist. So I think this is, we're knowing early. So if on February 5th, when the board says we have a go-ahead and it moves through Marge will be on this. I mean, starting to do those searches. Because we can actually go out and recruit for these positions.
Okay, thank you. Joanna?
I actually wanted to move off this to something else, but if anyone else has questions, yeah.
One more quick question. You mentioned the district assigns where they're going under the director of elementary education. Is there an average duration that a coach is in a classroom or working with a group of specific teachers? And then who determines when they're ready to come off that and success has been achieved, and then they can.
So you use a structure called coaching cycles. So you make a plan in advance. So this is what we're going to focus on, and the cycle will be 4 weeks. And it's like targeting an intervention for a student. You target that focus for 4 weeks. And we haven't decided on what the coaching cycle length will be yet. But that's what would determine that. And they typically go, if you're focusing on reading, they're going for the reading period in the classroom, or the literacy block in the classroom.
And it's not so much that they would come necessarily off of coaching. It would be that there would be another area of interest, an area of study, an area of focus that they would want to work on when they have an opportunity to go in a different part of the cycle or in a new cycle.
Thank you. Joanna, did you have a
I
question?
wanted to ask a few questions about Middlesex. Because, the school's part of the curriculum and literature at schools. So first, the world language FTE. I assume, since you said this is due to enrollment, it sounds like it's not like at the high school, like a 0.2 and a 0.5. It's a whole one position. But class selection is coming up soon. I don't remember when 5th graders select, but, it would be
Soon.
nice. Yeah.
Well, so Kate's nervous about this because we talked about it. Because there is, kids have choices, so they make first, second, third choice. There could, depending if there's a massive influx of kids for one particular language, it could put us in a position where we're talking about second choices for some kids. But we won't know that until we go through the process.
Okay, so your intention is to reduce this position no matter what, and then try to, much like you did with French earlier this year, try to figure things out on the fly later on if they don't work out the way.
If we need to at that point.
Okay. And then my other question was, can you explain more about the world language team leader? The way that the narrative read, I took away that there's one team leader for 23 teachers, and then there'd be a second team leader for the 4.
I just want to, Marge, was this a contractual? This was adding the position? Well, Kate, feel free to come on up
Thank you.
to the podium. Isn't it great that we have principals here? I mean,
Thank you for the question. So we're using the word team there differently than how we usually use the word team when we talk about Middlesex. We typically talk about our team model as being a team of 5 or 6 teachers who share that 100 to 110 students. Here, what we're talking about is each of those teams have a team leader, right? And each of those team leaders has a seat at our team leader meeting table monthly. Our unified arts teachers also have a unified arts team leader. Our school counselors have a team leader who have a seat at that table. Our world language teachers are currently the only department that does not have a seat at that table. And when I think about a distributed leadership and the school climate and the school culture, it's a really important part of that communication cycle for our building and ensuring consistency. So that's why, even though it wasn't part of the contractual, I asked and begged and said, can we please get that for our teachers?
Thank you. That clarifies it. Great.
thank you, Kate.
And then my last question was, actually, I can ask this during Shirley's update. I just want to say I'm very excited about the executive functioning being moved into the Flex Advisory. And I don't know if you're already thinking about this, the year after, but it would be great if we could even push it down to like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I don't know if that's already things that are being thought of, but just want to put that out there.
As Dr. Byrne indicated, the focus areas that we discussed tonight, those 5, they'll come back to you next year in FY28.
Okay, great.
Are there other questions on our schools and instructional presentation? No. Okay, I guess we will move on to public comment.
If anyone would like to participate in public comment, please approach the podium and state your name and town of residence. Once recognized, please note that you will have up to 3 minutes to comment.
So we have no public comment. We will move on to the next portion of our agenda. So any of you who would like to leave the room prior to our policy discussion are welcome to be dismissed. Thank you for attending, all of our principals and staff that were here tonight. And thank you for all of these budgets. These are great. Thank you, Dr. Fetterman, too. Okay, while they're leaving, we will move on to the policy discussion. I'm going to read this. Further discussion and possible action. This is our second reading on proposed Board of Education policies. Policy 4250, employment and student teacher checks. Policy 4275, family and medical leave. Policy 4450, policy regarding employees, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Policy 5010, admission to the public schools at or before age 5. Policy 5125, students in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Policy 5200, homeless students and youth. Policy 5300, student use of the district's computer systems and internet safety. Policy 1300, 4111, and 5710, non-discrimination, community personnel and students. And policy 1400, policy regarding signs, symbols, flags, and advertising on school property. Marge?
So I don't think that we received any questions on any of the policies in between meetings.
No.
Is there any discussion from board members? This is our second reading. Okay, hold on, I want to make sure we have a quorum because we will be voting.
We do.
Okay. What's that? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes, okay. Okay. So we will be voting on the approval of these policies as they have been revised.
Are we going to vote on everything all at once?
You could do
We're
it.
going to vote, do you want to do the consent?
You can if you'd like, or if you want to go one by one.
Oh, no, I was going to do them all at
Oh,
once.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
You don't have to read that again.
No. May I have a motion to approve the proposed revisions to the Board of Education policies that were just read as part of agenda item 6C? Joanna is the first and Bill is the second. All in favor? That is unanimous. So those policies are amended and revised as we just noted. And then moving on to consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Sarah, seconded by Joanna. Are there items on actually, I'm going to read the consent agenda just so that everybody in the audience is aware of what we were talking about. We have the approval of minutes, acceptance of contemplated gifts for DHS lobby furniture, board committee reports, and personnel report. In terms of discussion, does anyone have any discussion? Joanna?
I just want to say thank you to the DHSPA for sponsoring, and purchasing all this new lobby furniture for them to hang out with.
Thank you very much for the DHSPA for that furniture. Any further discussion on consent agenda? All in favor of approving the consent agenda? That is unanimous. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Oh, is there public comment? Do we have that actually? Oh, we do have a round of public comment. Is there any public comment? Oh, follow-up action. I will just say, we did have one follow-up action item that Katie had brought up about ongoing monitoring, but I think we're going to be talking about that at the curriculum committee meeting on Thursday as part of an ongoing effort. So, and there was no public comment. Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Sarah, seconded by Greg, all in favor?